So like I was saying, good morning, happy birthday, America. 247 years have gone by since that idea was planted into this nation. You know, usually when I think about the Declaration of Independence, I think about that phrase that everyone uses about every person being created equal and being endowed with inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So when I was preparing this talk, I actually, opened up a copy of the Declaration of Independence and read through it. And it was interesting to read it in the light of New Thought, our teaching. And I realized that structurally, it's not really that different from a spiritual mind treatment in the way that it is laid out. It begins by linking up divinity or God, or they call it our creator, with humanity, mentioning, that these rights are inalienable, automatic, part of creation. And then it gives a long, very long list of all the unwanted conditions that people were suffering because of British rule. So it has a long list of what they didn't want to have anymore, what they desired to change. And then they made a declaration of the new conditions that they wanted to see, that they chose, and that they affirmed to be their new reality. So it was interesting to realize that it was kind of written in that same way. And of course, while it took many years before the country was actually at peace, before we had a constitution and an organized government, and let's face it, many years have passed, and still everything is not exactly the way we would like it. In fact, sometimes it feels like, oh, we're backsliding. What about those rights? But the original proclamation of the ideas about self-determination and freedom and even the right to happiness itself, those ideas were planted very firmly as the seed. These ideas have continued to grow and expand and evolve into what we experience today. And this experience still creates the fertile soil for our future. This is what's always happening as we grow and as we evolve. So this week, as we're celebrating our shared freedom, we can give thanks for the decisions that were made so long ago, as well as for the bravery of the colonists to think that they could make changes. And while we're doing this, let's also celebrate our individual freedom. Because, even though it's easy to feel bombarded by the news about what is going wrong, we have to remember to notice what is going right. We cannot allow ourselves to be discouraged. We have to keep reminding ourselves of how far we have come and stay grateful for all the freedoms that we do have and celebrate that path. So even if you're feeling dissatisfied with some of the rollbacks in freedom that seem to be taking place because of politics or economics or whatever, because of ideas that are bouncing around, we need to have faith like the colonists, and we must also make a statement of freedom for ourselves by forming in our own minds a vision of the world we consciously want to experience by denying that unconscious acceptance of conditions we no longer want to experience in our own personal lives or in our communities or nations. And then declare firmly what it is we do choose. and affirm that as our new reality. So, I think we should do that not just for ourselves, but also because as practitioners of New Thought, and I don't mean a licensed practitioner, but we're all practicing the teaching all the time. We don't just practice gratitude so that we can personally feel more cheerful, but we also recognize that we have been blessed with these ideas. And this is a spiritual practice we don't talk about too much, but usually we teach it to people who are becoming licensed practitioners. But it's really very simple. And it's called keeping the high watch. And it's something that all of us can do for ourselves, for our families, and for our country. To keep the high watch towards the one, the oneness of all. And so it's so perfect that Andrea played that song, Let It Be. It's sort of, because when I think about keeping the high watch, how would I explain it? It's like that sense of letting it be, knowing it's going to be okay. I was thinking about it as, you're always engaged with the world. And then, sometimes you step into what I call the parent mind. It's like, here's how things ought to be. I'm going to supervise this, make it happen. But maybe you could step into your grandparent mind or your wisdom mind, where you just kind of are like, oh, don't worry, it's going to be okay. Have faith. Use the wisdom that you have gathered to just know that things, no matter how things seem, we're moving along the right path. And so when we do that, when we turn our thoughts towards good, we're setting the stage for good to unfold. When we keep the high watch for ourselves, our nation, we're simply aligning ourselves with the idea that while we may seem to be stumbling around in our lives, the greater truth is, and this is what Martin Luther King Jr. said back in 1968. He said, we shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So I think that's a beautiful saying. And so naturally I looked that up, because when I say something to a group, I like to, is that exactly what he said? Yes. But what I found out, and I thought it was so interesting, Dr. King, was quoting Theodore Parker. Now, Theodore Parker was a Unitarian minister and an American transcendentalist who gave a speech against slavery back in 1858. He was an abolitionist. Because here, in our teaching, we know that a lot of what we teach was inspired by the American transcendentalists. I thought, isn't that lovely to know? This idea of freedom is so intrinsic to America and to our lives and to our teaching. We take it really seriously. So if you think about the idea of freedom, and let's call it radiant freedom. Can you think of freedom as radiant freedom? If you think about it as being your inalienable right. And last week, Reverend Maureen talked about radiant health. So radiant health, it's a little easier to measure health than freedom, right? It's a little concrete. You wake up like, oh, I feel good today. Do you wake up and say, hey, I feel free today? Or maybe we should start celebrating that. And we're going to talk about some other topics, because we've been talking about spiritual principles and spiritual practices and putting it together for our lives in a way that works. So while freedom may be hard to measure, all of these ideas, health, freedom, creativity, prosperity, they all are intertwined as we study and learn to get aligned with these aspects of life, as we learn to live more and more in harmony with life itself. Now, freedom can have many manifestations. You know, the first thing people think of is freedom from tyranny, freedom from slavery, freedom from restraints. But you can also think about freedom as freedom to just even think your own thoughts, just even freedom of the mind, as well as, of course, freedom to do what you want. But it is the freedom of the mind, our freedom to discover, think, and decide for our own self that is really at the heart of the practice of science of mind. So when Jan gave today's reading, I thought it was great. I wasn't expecting all the audience participation. So, but Dr. Science asked why. You know, why do we want to be healthy, prosperous, and free? And then, you know, she gives the answer. Well, because we must. We have to. There's this impulse within us to express more. We're part of the universe. The universe is in expansion. So our lives must also be in expansion. In his book, The Science of Mind, our founder, Ernest Holmes, wrote, "Nature waits on our self-recognition." He wrote, "We see abundance in the universe. We cannot count the grains of sand on a single beach. The earth contains untold riches, and the very air is vibrant with power. Why then is man poor, weak, and afraid?" The Science of Mind deals with these questions. He says the divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law, which is meaning within natural laws. Thus, the inherent nature of man is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. We do well to listen to this inner voice, this desire, for it tells us of a life wonderful in its scope, of a love beyond our fondest dreams, of a freedom which the soul craves. I just love that passage. Holmes is saying it is our inherent nature to be free. So how does that actually work? So another author that I like, Raymond Charles Barker, explained it in a little more approachable way in his book, Treat Yourself to Life. He said, well, it's as simple as when you open the refrigerator door and say to yourself, what'll I have for dinner? The food in the refrigerator doesn't say, take me. You put that food in the pan, you apply the heat, and by a law, a natural law, it becomes cooked. The food can't tell you it's not going to get in the pan. You put it in the pan, you decide this, because you are a conscious intelligence acting upon a subconscious form. So if you can stand in front of your refrigerator and decide on your dinner, then you can do exactly the same thing in any other phase of life, he said. I thought, yeah, that's freedom. That's one way to demonstrate what is freedom. It's not that hard. But does it really make sense? Do you really believe that you're free to choose anything in your life in the same way that you can choose, you know, from whatever's in your refrigerator that you'd like to have for dinner? Well,
that's Talmud.
very nice, a musical interlude. When you think about freedom, and this idea of limitless choice. If you're like me, I hate to admit it, but if you're like me, you're going to instantly think of all the obstacles, right? Well, what about? What about my age? What about my responsibilities? What about my budget? What about, well, I really wanted to please this other person. Or what about my need to take care of other people, or my kids, or my parents, or my friends, or my banker? What about my job? What about bills? What about my lease? What about the difficulty of finding this or that? You know, all of these things that just pop up. You know, I think sometimes they're called intrusive thoughts. And sometimes they can be real issues that do need to be dealt with. Just like that list of I don't want it anymore in the Declaration of Independence. And other times they're just worries. They're just worries. You know, if you're a worrier, have you gotten in the habit of worry? Has it become like an unconscious thing where you don't really mean? I mean, for instance, when I'm not thinking, I'm not meaning to, not consciously worrying about something, it's just kind of like bubbling up on its own. Have you ever noticed, either in your own life or other people's, that what a person worries about tends to appear in their lives? So I remember being on a camping trip when I was a teenager with a friend who was so worried about bugs in her food. What happened? Of course. Sitting on a picnic table with a whole group of teenage girls, the bug comes down and lands on her plate. Surprise. No one else cared, but she was very upset. Anyway, back in the 80s, I was tremendously worried about our family's finances. And it just seemed like the more I worried about it, the worse I got. The more I cut back on just everything, spending and giving, and it just seemed like that was never a solution. They just continued like a cycle. And then I actually came to this center and started learning about prosperity principles and listening to tapes and using affirmations and getting more of a clarity on what true prosperity is. And as I changed my thoughts and actions, everything changed and shifted. I made a whole new set of decisions, and things really began to turn around. Because the fact is that worries create an invisible type of bondage. And when we engage in worry, we allow it to become an unconscious habit. What we want to do is step away from those unconscious thoughts, bring them up to the light of day, look at them consciously, and consciously make a decision. Do we want to keep them or discard them? Do we need to declutter our minds by getting rid of some of these worries that really no longer serve us? You know, the first step in a 12-step program for an alcoholic or an addict is to admit that there is a problem. And it's the same thing with these unconscious other types of ideas that no longer serve us. You have to first see what is going on in your life. Because if you don't know what you want to change or why you want to change it, it's not going to happen. When we're pushed by feelings of being uncomfortable mentally or physically, right? Because isn't that, you know, I get so worried and I don't like it anymore, so I want to change it. So when I'm describing it, it sounds negative, but don't worry. We have a great term for it. We call it divine discontent, right? When you are dissatisfied, and that dissatisfaction can boost you and lead you into a new train of thought, into looking at what you don't want, what you would prefer. You know, just look at it as divine discontent and treat it like a signal to wake up, to wake up from unconscious patterns of living, and to exercise your inalienable right to freedom, the freedom you have to choose a new pattern, or you might want to strengthen a good pattern that you already have. I'm not saying like everything in your life is bad, you need a complete change. You might want to begin to pay more attention to what is going right, to what really is right in your life, and to focus on that. So you can make your own declaration of independence. In fact, today I'd like to suggest this as a spiritual practice, just like keeping the high watch is a spiritual practice. Making your own declaration of independence. And what better week to do it than this week, where I have the feeling that the 4th of July is going to be about 7 days long. It seems like, at least according to my dog, who's already hiding out from fireworks last night. So how do you write your own declaration of independence? Independence from whatever's weighing you down. Independence to create a new vision. So the way to start, and this might seem strange, is start by becoming grateful. Notice the good that you're already experiencing. Just allow it to be a mindfulness practice. Because when you do that, when you begin thinking about what's right, you actually are shifting your consciousness, shifting your mind into a point where you can realize more easily the greater truth. That there is good for you already in existence in some form. And that kind of gives you the confidence to know and affirm that you do have choice. There's good for you already, and more is possible. Then there's a few different approaches you can take. So one is to follow the divine discontent approach, which you could say is what our founding, fathers and their wives, because a lot of them did have helping spouses, take the divine discontent approach, where you feel that unhappiness, what's wrong, and actually go ahead and make a list of those, what we call unwanted conditions. Look at that list, and as you go down through the list, think about what you would like to see instead. And this will be your declaration of intention. Allow that to be your guide for creating a vision of what you would like to see. A totally different approach you might want to take, and this might be where you're not feeling burdened, you just want to experience more, is the practice of visioning. So Reverend Maureen gave a talk maybe a month or two ago on the topic of visioning. If you missed it, you can look at our YouTube channel and watch that. But visioning is a rather meditative practice of getting quiet and then asking yourself some questions for that we suggest are just getting quiet and then think to yourself, what is the highest vision for my life? Just think about that. Maybe take a pen and pencil and write it down. Then ask yourself, what must I become in order to manifest this vision? Take a few moments to think about that. Ask, what must I release to manifest this vision? And then finally, what talents, gifts, and skills do I already possess that serve this vision? So that's one method called visioning. And then another approach, which I always think is a great approach, is to either give yourself a spiritual mind treatment or ask for a spiritual mind treatment. So in this case, you would be, fill out a form or have one of us do it or do it yourself. We've got some steps to doing your own spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer. And the purpose of this treatment or prayer is clarity. Because a lot of times we just feel confusion and chaos when we think about our thoughts. It's hard to sort out what's the most important, what's not so important. So just a simple treatment for clarity of mind can be a wonderful way to start making your own Declaration of Independence. So when you discover what you would like to assert for yourself in your Declaration of Independence, that's where you start. You just start where you are. You don't think like, I shoulda be here, let go of that shoulda, woulda, coulda. And just be like, well, here I am, and here's what I desire. And just gradually work on changing your thinking so that it aligns with what you would like to experience in your life. So if you would like to have greater health, if that's in your Declaration of Independence, don't let go of the worries about what's wrong and begin affirming for yourself. Every day in every way, I am getting healthier and healthier. I feel healthy. There is perfect health at my center, and it's radiant health. That is now my experience. Don't beat yourself up if you don't experience instant changes, although you may. But most of us need to practice these ideas consistently over time so that we have consistent, long-lasting results. As Raymond Charles Barker put it, treatment sows the seed, and the law of the subconscious provides the harvest. Your consistent, positive attitude gives the seed time to grow. Sow it, nourish it, forget about it, and let it grow. So, this is what we know. We're all free to claim our freedom. This is a truth. It's our inalienable right. And in a way, it's our responsibility to claim good for ourselves and for each other. So we have this capacity to think and decide. We ought to use it. We have this ability to experience good in our lives. We ought to embrace it. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are blessings to us all. So I'm going to invite you during this week-long or Tuesday celebration of the 4th of July to try to keep the high watch for yourself, for our nation, for our community. And just know that we are free to experience wonders, miracles, and unlimited good. So independence is ours. Let's grab it and take it. Thank you, everyone.